Well, hello, I'm Lynn Hobaika,
And I'm Ricky Barnett.
and we're here to tell you about how to make a paper mache mask. These are examples of masks that we've already made and painted, and this is where a direction that you can take your mask. Okay. So first, we're gonna show how we make the initial form to start building on. What you want is a friend who will hold the cardboard up to their face. So then you're gonna wanna trace around their head and make sure that the circle goes bigger than their head, because this is gonna end up folding around, and it doesn't need to be perfect. You just want a general idea. And you'll also want to mark the nose. So I marked the top of the nose and the bottom of the nose. So, and then just make those two marks into a triangle on the inside.
So we'll cut the nose out. And I guess if you're not comfortable with knives or an X-Acto knife, you can have somebody help you that is more comfortable. And anytime I'm cutting stuff, I just try to move pretty slow so there's no sudden movements that are going to surprise me. And then once we get the nose cut, we can kind of see like where our eyes need to be.
An easy way, rather than having to poke around and find your eyeballs, you can measure the distance from between pupils, and you can see that Ricky's pupils are about 3 inches apart. And so then what we'll do is just measure the 3 inches away from the center of the nose. Okay. And then you can just make holes where those will go.
So when I cut out the eyes, I tend to do a smaller hole first. And then we can make it bigger if we need to. This will kind of give us a good idea of which direction we need to push the eyes, up or down or further apart. So that's pretty good. So I know this is a good spot to keep my eyes. So if I want them to be bigger so I have more visual, I can do that. And the smaller it is, the harder it is to get your fingers in there and tuck it around. Okie dokie. So basically, we now pretty much have a mask. And so now we'll start shaping it.
So the circle that I traced is just to give me a general idea of where I want the lines to be, but I can refine that shape a little bit more. So I like to have more of a straight side. And then I'll arch it over and try and get it a little more symmetrical. And everything ends up getting covered with the paper mache, and so none of it needs to be perfect. Okay. Once you've got the whatever shape that is cut out, what you're going to want to do is dart both the top and bottom, which will help to bring the mask in and hug your face. So you can see in these finished examples the way the mask kind of curves around.
Okay, so when we start to try to fold the face over, I try to do 3 darts, and I just kind of do it at random. I don't measure them out or anything. So we'll just cut along these lines. So the cool thing with the cardboard is you can actually like bend it around and break it up and get it to be a little bit more pliable. And so to break this up, you kind of just roll it around. So we use masking tape. You can use whatever tape you have laying around. It's a little bit nicer than Scotch tape. It's a little bit more porous, so the paper mache will actually kind of stick to it and not slide around.
So basically what you're doing is you cut those triangles out and then fold it together to join this triangle sides back together, and that's going to cause the mask to start curving. So these points will end up joining like so.
And sometimes if you cut the little triangles out or the darts out, and they're not perfect, it doesn't really matter. You can kind of like stretch them out a little bit with the tape. And all that stuff gets covered with paper mache, so it's pretty nice. There is a little bit of room to play and adjust them. So just do the top now, and it'll start looking like an actual mask. So now we basically have our starting point for paper mache.
My mask is going to be a sunshine or a sun. So what I'm going to do is start out by tracing a halo around the mask, which will get cut out and glued on later. So first what I want to do is trace the shape of the mask. And then from there, I'm just going to make little and add a second half to this after I get the first one done.
So one thing that Lynn and I do a lot different is Lynn kind of usually has a plan. Hers masks seem to be a little bit more intricate than mine, and I just kind of start going. So I'm going to make a nose now. And I just kind of roughly mark an area that I know will cover it. And you can make your noses like however big you want. This one is going to be pretty just nose-like. But one thing to definitely keep in mind at this stage is making sure you have your nose placement where your nose can go. Otherwise, your mask doesn't really sit on your face and it's actually really uncomfortable to wear.
So the cardboard that I'm using for this part of the mask is double corrugated, so it's a lot thicker than the first form of the mask. It's just less likely to get banged up.
So when I start to hot glue all the things onto my mask that I'm making, I like to fold the edges just to give it a little bit of a tab so the glue has somewhere to sit. And it doesn't necessarily need to hold super well. The paper mache will hold it together, but it is nice to not have it falling apart while you're working on it. And it is a lot easier to put the glue on the thing that you're sticking and not on the thing you're sticking to. So you can make your mouth whatever size, shape you want. I generally try to go almost as wide as the eyes just to keep the face, since nothing is in proportion. I just like to kind of have things be a little balanced.
So right now you can see there's a gap where this part is straight and this part is curved. So what I can do is soften the cardboard the same way we softened it to curve the edges. And I'll just go ahead and basically I'm just crushing it with my thumbs to make it a little bit more pliable. So I think that'll work. I can sort of bend this outer cardboard around the edge now to get it to hug all of the sides. So now I'm going to glue this half of the sunbeams on to my sunshine.
Okay. So when I make ears, I kind of sometimes will cut out a few and play with them. Trying to figure out, like, because I don't even know what this thing's going to be yet, so. But I do have a tendency to like really low ears that are just a C shape. So that's usually what I start with. And I just make a big oval. That looks, and then split it down the middle. So it's kind of Looks like a drawing of a pill. Break this cardboard up. And just kind of start playing with placement for ears. And same with the nose, I'll fold little tabs on the backs of them for the glue.
So I'm just gonna get the second half of my sunbeams on here.
The nice thing about having the tab on the ears is that not only does it offer you a surface to glue onto, but later it'll kind of operate as a hinge when you're paper macheing, and you can kind of move the ear back and forth without ripping it off. And this part's pretty fun because you're just kind of like, at least for me, is like I'll just grab any of the little things that I had cut off and like start playing with placement and just seeing, you know, where things might look cool and just basically creating whatever. Maybe this guy will get a little crown.
Now I have the second half to my sun. And so I'm gonna squish it up to make sure I can get it to fit on there. That looks cool. And so now I'll just glue it on. It's all attached onto the mask now. There are areas where there's gaps, and that is okay. The paper mache will end up covering all of that. So I just want to make sure that it's secure on there. And I'm going to go in with some masking tape and just reinforce those connections to make sure that it won't pop off.
Okay, so now that we have most of our masks kind of mapped out, we are going to start doing paper mache. And so it's probably a good idea that you put down like a tablecloth or plastic or something that can definitely get ruined.
So to make the paper mache, what you need is flour. All-purpose flour works great, and water. And the recipe that I use is very simple. It's just 1 part flour and 1 part water. So we're just gonna make a cup of each. It doesn't need to be exact. I'll just fill up my measuring cup with some flour. And now I'll add the water. Cool.
And you just stir it together. And yeah, since it's not exact, you can kind of just add more water or more flour if you get it, if it looks like it needs to be thicker or thinner. You definitely don't want it to be like too thick. I guess it's kind of like cake batter is what you're going for, but if it's too thick, it'll have a hard time absorbing into the paper, and you really want the paper to absorb the paste. Okay.
Great. So we have a box full of paper, which we've already torn into strips, and they kind of vary, but you want something that's about like 1 or 2 inches wide. Seems to work for me. And I'll usually end up tearing it down to the size I need as I'm working. So this is a good size. Okay, so what I'll do is I dip 1/2 of the paper strip into the goo, the wheat paste, and I make sure I get both sides covered, and then I just use my fingers like a scissors and I squeegee it off, and then I'll flip it over and do the same thing on the half that didn't get pasted yet, and squeegee that off. I want to make sure I get most of the goop off. It really absorbs into the paper pretty well, so you don't need it to be very gooey. And then once I get it covered, then I'll tear it down to strips that make a little bit more sense. So it doesn't need to be quite this long, and I'll just drape it over where I need it to go. So I'll just start right here on top of the nose. And you can see where this gap is between the nose and the mask. And I just want to cover that up so that the mask or the nose looks like it's protruding, but it looks like it's a part of the piece now. And so once this dries, that connection will be very strong. I'll also, as I'm doing the nose, I'll also cover the eyes. And once the paper is no longer gooey, I'll go in and reopen those holes. So this is newsprint. I don't know if we said that before, but it's soft. So regular newspaper would also work, but you want something that's like a fairly thin and porous paper so that it'll absorb the wheat paste really well. And it's also, it'll bend over the form more easily than if it were a thicker, like even printer paper is too thick for this.
So I do my eyes a little bit different than Lynn. And I kind of paper mache up to them. And then I get little strips and wrap it around the eyes. So maybe you want them longer than you would think, but fairly thin. So I tear these pretty thin. And I just kind of try to slide them in there. I use the back of a brush a lot to push things in. And I'll just come in from the back side and push that down. And the paper mache, actually makes everything stronger and a little bit smoother, so it's nice to paper mache the inside of the mask as well. So wrapping these little strips through the eyes is definitely, it's not a waste for it to get on the back side.
As I put down each strip of paper, I try to, the same way that I squeegeed the paste off of the paper, I'm kind of squeegee the paper onto the mask. So I'm trying to push it down and make it as smooth as possible so that there won't be as many areas where the paper pops up later on.
And it is definitely not as fast as people think it is. I think sometimes people think paper mache is like a really quick process, and it is like pretty quick in the sense that, you know, you do it and then you're done with it. But it does take time to dry and to, you know, put all your strips on. So if you are making a mask on a timeline, I would definitely give yourself a day or two to let things dry properly before you paint and decorate things with color or hair or whatever you're going to add to it later. So I usually work with a stiff bristled brush, where when these get a little dried out as I'm tearing them, I can kind of just add a little bit more paste and smooth things out. You will notice your fingers get really sticky, and then things have a harder time letting go of them.
So, my mask is all covered up with paper mache now, so I'm gonna show how I open up the eye holes. I try to do it while the paper mache is still pretty soft. And basically, I'll just take my X-Acto knife and cut into the hole on both sides, both eyeballs. Gotta find it. Like so, and then I just jam it in. Nothing too fancy. I'll usually take something, pardon me, sir, like the back end of a paintbrush and just roll it around in there to kind of compress the paper mache around that and get a nice clean line. So it's basically folding in the same way that Ricky folds his in, just a different, less precise way. And then once that is done, I'll go in and paper mache the back, but I'll usually let this dry up a little bit more before I start the back. All right, cool. So now we finished paper macheing the fronts of our masks. Generally what we'll do is let the front dry, and then once that it has firmed up quite a bit and is no longer sticky, I would flip it over and finish the back. And then on the front side, if there's, I'll usually add like a little bit more to areas that look like they need to be a little smoother or add some details. So I brought this example for some details, like the cheeks were added just with more pieces of paper mache, and the mouth was added that way as well. So that's just an extra element that you can do. And then once you've got everything completely finished, you want to let it dry for a day, and then you'll be able to start painting it.
So after the masks are done and we let them dry for, about 24 hours is good, it's time to start decorating. So what I tend to do is, like, I always start out with just pencils, number 2 pencils or Sharpie, and I'll just kind of start mapping out like where I want things and drawing and having fun. And I don't have to worry about erasing if I'm going to paint. And then we typically, for mask making or anything that doesn't need to have like an archival quality to it, we just use the cheapest paints we can get from Walmart or any kind of drugstore that sells paints. And also the same with brushes. So whatever your favorite paint is to use, or brushes, or markers, they all work.
So you could also use colored pencils or crayons. It's really versatile. I mean, basically, once this dries, it's just paper. One thing that you'll notice between the mask that we just finished and the dry mask is in the color. You'll see a big difference, and that's a good indication that it's fully dry. So sometimes, even if it doesn't feel wet, it's still a little bit more gray. So you want to make sure that it's fully dry before you start painting. And then we can show our finished masks. And so this is how ours turn out once they've been painted. So I just want to show the back of the mask so you can see how it ends up looking once we've paper machéed the back as well. Having the inside paper machéed makes it feel a little bit more comfortable on your face. And for attaching it, having a strap for your head, we use 2 pieces of elastic band, and one wraps around the side of your head and the other one will rest on top so that the mask doesn't slide down the front of your face. These are stapled on, so we used a staple gun to get them through, but you could also poke a hole and tie them through. And then I hot glued around the staples so that the ends of them wouldn't be pokey and poke into my face. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for mask making. I hope that you guys have a good time making your own whimsical creatures. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. See you later.